The sun cast long shadows over the barren trail as dust settled in the wake of a departing wagon train, leaving behind nothing but wheel ruts and a solitary figure clutching a small bundle of possessions. Bethany Collins stood frozen in disbelief, watching her only chance at a new life disappear over the horizon into the golden Kansas sunset of 1857. Her world had collapsed in mere minutes when the wagon master had declared they couldn't wait any longer for her to find her missing trunk, a trunk that contained everything of value she owned. "Wait," she called out, her voice breaking as she raised a hand toward the distant procession. But the rumble of wooden wheels continued to fade, swallowed by the vast prairie. The train was bound for California, carrying families seeking gold and farmland, merchants chasing opportunity, and Bethany's last connection to civilization. She sank to her knees in the tall grass, the reality of her abandonment settling over her like a heavy blanket. 23 years old, alone in the wilderness with only the clothes on her back, a small satchel of personal items, and barely enough food for 2 days. The nearest town was Fairplay, Colorado territory, at least a week's journey on foot through untamed country. Bethany wiped away angry tears with the back of her hand. She'd spent every penny she had to secure passage on this wagon train after her parents' death had left her with nothing but debts in Philadelphia. There was nothing to return to in the East, and now the West seemed equally inhospitable. As twilight deepened, the vast emptiness around her grew more threatening. Strange sounds carried on the wind, the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of creatures moving through the grass. Bethany gathered herself to her feet, knowing she needed to find shelter before darkness fully descended. She had barely walked 100 yards when the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Her heart raced as she turned, squinting into the setting sun. A lone rider appeared, his silhouette growing larger as he closed the distance between them. Bethany tensed, aware of the dangers a woman alone might face. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers wrapping around her father's small pocket knife, the only protection she had. The rider slowed his horse as he approached, and she could make out his features. A young man with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. His hat was pulled low, but she could see kind eyes studying her with concern. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, not the flashy attire of the gamblers and gunslingers she'd encountered in the few frontier towns they'd passed through. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "The name's Lucas Owens. I was riding scout for your train." He glanced in the direction of the departed wagons. "Noticed they left without you." "They didn't want to wait," Bethany said, struggling to keep the tremor from her voice. "I needed more time to search for my trunk." Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful as he surveyed the darkening landscape. "Night's coming fast, and these plains ain't safe after dark." He extended his hand toward her. "You're with me now." Bethany hesitated, studying his face for any sign of deceit. "Why would you come back? You don't know me." "No decent man leaves a woman alone in wild country," he replied simply. "I've got a small camp set up about 2 miles back. We can figure out your next move come morning." Her options were painfully few. Remain alone in open country with night falling, or trust this stranger who'd ridden back when no one else had. "I don't have any money to pay you for your trouble," she admitted. A smile crossed his face, transforming his weathered features. "Didn't ask for any, did I?" He extended his hand again. "So, are you coming?" Bethany took a deep breath and reached up to grasp his hand. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her swing up behind him on the horse. "Hold tight," he instructed as she cautiously placed her hands at his waist. The horse moved forward, its steady gait carrying them across the prairie as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Bethany found herself breathing in the scent of leather, horse, and sun-warmed cotton. Despite her precarious situation, an unexpected sense of security washed over her. "I'm Bethany," she said after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "Bethany Collins." "Well, Miss Collins," Lucas replied, his voice carrying over his shoulder, Let's get you somewhere safe for the night. Tomorrow we can decide what happens next." They rode in comfortable silence as twilight gave way to a clear, star-filled night. The moon rose, bathing the prairie in silver light, revealing its rolling contours stretching endlessly in all directions. Despite her circumstances, Bethany couldn't help but be awed by the wild beauty surrounding them. True to his word, Lucas's camp appeared after about 20 minutes of riding a small fire flickering beneath a stand of cottonwood trees near a narrow stream. He dismounted first, then offered his hand to help her down. "It's not much," he said, gesturing toward the simple camp, "but it's sheltered from the wind and has fresh water." Bethany moved closer to the fire, grateful for its warmth as the night air grew cooler. "It looks perfect right now," she admitted, sinking down on a log that had been positioned as a seat. Lucas busied himself with caring for his horse, removing the saddle and bridle before allowing it to drink from the stream. His movements were efficient and practiced, betraying years of experience on the frontier. "Are you hungry?" he asked, returning to the fire and reaching for a small pot. "Yes," she admitted. "I didn't take time to eat when we stopped earlier. I was too busy searching for my trunk." He nodded, adding beans and dried meat to the pot before placing it over the flames. "What was in it that was so important, if you don't mind my asking?" Bethany stared into the fire. "Everything. My mother's wedding ring, my father's pocket watch, all my clothes except what I'm wearing, and the deed to a small plot of land near Sacramento." She swallowed hard. "It's all I had left of my old life." Lucas stirred the pot thoughtfully. "And no one would wait while you looked for it. The wagon master said we'd already lost too much time to weather, said they needed to cross the mountains before the first snow." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I thought someone might help, but most of them were strangers. The few I'd spoken with during our journey just looked away when I pleaded for more time." "That's a hard lesson about folks," Lucas said quietly. "Some will leave you behind without a second thought if you become inconvenient." "And others will ride back," Bethany replied, meeting his gaze across the fire. "Why did you?" Lucas seemed uncomfortable with the question. He focused on stirring the pot for several seconds before answering. "I know what it's like to be left behind." He lifted a ladle and tested the beans. "My pa abandoned us when I was 10, left my ma and 3 kids with nothing but a leaky cabin and winter coming on. Never saw him again." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but I learned early that helping folks when they're down is the right thing to do." He filled a tin cup with the bean mixture and handed it to her. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill your stomach." They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and distant night sounds providing a natural backdrop to their meal. When they finished, Lucas produced a small pouch of coffee and set water to boil. "So," he said as he handed her a cup of the strong, black brew, "what's your plan now, Miss Collins?" Bethany cradled the warm cup in her hands. "I don't have one," she admitted. "Without my trunk and the deed inside it, I have no claim to the land in California. Without money, I can't buy passage on another wagon train." She took a sip of coffee, wincing at its bitterness. "I suppose I need to find work somewhere until I can save enough to continue west." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "There's a town called Fairplay about 3 days' ride from here. It's in Colorado territory. Small place, but growing since they found gold nearby. Might be work there for a woman of decent background, teaching perhaps, or keeping books." "You know the town well." "Passed through a few times," he replied. "I work as a scout and cattle driver mostly, moving between the territories as needed." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. "I could take you there if you'd like. Make sure you arrive safely." Bethany studied him in the flickering light, trying to understand why a stranger would offer such kindness. "That's very generous, Mr. Owens." "Lucas," he corrected, "and it's not much out of my way. I need to head toward Denver anyhow." "Then I accept your offer with gratitude," she said. "Though I wish I could repay your kindness somehow." Lucas's smile was warm. "Just seeing you safely to town will be payment enough." He stood and stretched. You should get some rest. I'll take the first watch. Watch? Bethany asked, suddenly reminded of the dangers surrounding them. Just a precaution, he assured her. Wild animals mostly, though sometimes there are other travelers with less honorable intentions than mine. He gestured toward a bedroll he'd laid out near the fire. That's for you. I've got another blanket for myself. Bethany hadn't considered the propriety of their situation until that moment. Here she was, alone in the wilderness with a man she'd just met. In Philadelphia, such an arrangement would have been scandalous, her reputation ruined. But the rules of civilization seemed distant on the frontier, where survival took precedence over social niceties. "Thank you," she said simply, moving toward the bedroll. As she settled in, she watched Lucas take a position at the edge of the firelight, his rifle across his knees. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind raced with questions about her future and the man who had suddenly become her protector. The night passed without incident. Bethany woke at dawn to find Lucas already up, tending to a fresh fire and brewing coffee. He'd somehow caught fish from the stream and they sizzled in a small pan over the flames. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Thought you might appreciate a hot breakfast before we ride." Bethany sat up, running her fingers through her tangled auburn hair. "That smells wonderful." "I can't remember the last time I had fresh fish." They ate quickly, eager to begin the journey. As Lucas saddled his horse, Bethany washed their few dishes in the stream, determined to pull her weight. "My horse is strong, but carrying double will slow us down," Lucas explained as they prepared to depart. "We'll need to stop more often to rest him. Means our journey to Fairplay will take 3 or 4 days instead of 2. "I understand," Bethany replied. "I'm grateful for whatever pace gets us there safely." As before, she mounted behind him, this time with more confidence. They set off across the rolling prairie as the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to more dramatic terrain, rocky outcroppings, deeper ravines, and finally, the distant silhouette of mountains on the horizon. They stopped at midday near a stand of scrub oak to rest the horse and share a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Bethany's muscles ached from the unfamiliar hours in the saddle, but she made no complaint. "You ride well for someone from the city," Lucas observed as they sat in the shade. "My father kept horses when I was younger," she explained. "Before his business failed, I used to ride in the park on Sundays." She smiled at the memory. "Nothing like this, of course, just gentle walks along manicured paths." "What was his business?" Lucas asked. He owned a printing company. "Newspapers mostly, but also books and pamphlets." Her expression grew sad. "When the bigger steam presses came in, he couldn't compete. He died owing more than he had." Lucas nodded, understanding. "My pa worked the riverboats on the Mississippi. When the railroads started taking business, he turned to drinking. That's when he left us." They shared more of their histories as they continued their journey that afternoon. Lucas told her how his mother had managed to keep the family together, taking in laundry and sewing to make ends meet. How he'd started working at 12, first as a stable boy, then later with cattle. "When Ma died 2 years ago, there wasn't much keeping me in Missouri," he explained. "My brother joined the Army and my sister married a shopkeeper in St. Louis. I headed west, figured I'd find my fortune somehow." "And have you?" Bethany asked. "Found your fortune?" Lucas chuckled. "Not in gold or dollars, but I've seen things most men only read about in books. Herds of buffalo that stretch farther than the eye can see, mountains that touch the clouds. Skies so big they make you feel both insignificant and important all at once." He paused. "I reckon that's a kind of wealth." Bethany found herself drawn to his perspective. In Philadelphia, success was measured in material possessions and social standing. Lucas seemed to evaluate life by different standards. That evening, they camped in a shallow valley beside a small creek. As darkness fell, Lucas pointed out constellations, naming them in ways Bethany had never heard before. "That one there, the city folk call Ursa Major," he said, pointing skyward. Out here, it's the drinking gourd. Runaway slaves follow it north to freedom. You know so much about this land, Bethany observed, had good teachers. An old trapper named Harmon took me under his wing when I first came west, taught me how to read the land, the sky, the animals. Later, I rode with a Pawnee scout for the army. He showed me things about tracking and living off the land that no white man could have taught me. As they talked, Bethany realized how narrow her world had been in Philadelphia. Despite her education and cultural advantages, she knew little about practical survival or the diverse peoples who inhabited the vast territories west of the Mississippi. "You think I can survive out here?" she asked suddenly. A city woman with no practical skills? Lucas considered her question seriously. "The West changes people, Miss Collins. Those too rigid to adapt don't last long, but those willing to learn, to bend without breaking, they not only survive, they thrive." He studied her across the fire. "You struck me as adaptable from the moment I found you, standing there alone, frightened but not broken. That's the first test, and you passed it." His words warmed something inside her that had nothing to do with the fire between them. "Thank you for that. And please call me Bethany." "Bethany," he repeated, as if testing how it felt to say her name. The next morning brought low clouds and a biting wind from the north. They rode in silence, heads bent against the occasional spatter of rain. By midday, the weather had worsened, and Lucas guided them toward a line of bluffs in the distance. "There's a place up ahead where we can shelter," he explained, raising his voice above the wind. "An overhang I've used before, not quite a cave, but it'll keep us dry." The shelter proved to be a deep recess in the sandstone cliff, with enough room for them and the horse. Lucas worked quickly to start a small fire near the entrance, using the dry kindling he'd carried in his saddlebag. Bethany shivered as she huddled close to the flames. Her dress and shawl, practical enough for travel in fair weather, provided little protection against the cold rain. "Here," Lucas said, draping his coat around her shoulders. "This will help." "But you'll be cold," she protested. "I'm used to it," he replied, though she noticed him move closer to the fire. They spent the afternoon in their small sanctuary, watching the rain turn the prairie to mud outside. Lucas told stories of his travels, of the boomtowns that sprang up overnight when gold was discovered, of cattle drives across hostile territory, of the characters he'd met along the way. Bethany found herself laughing at his descriptions of saloon brawls and the antics of young cowboys experiencing city life for the first time. In return, she shared memories of Philadelphia, the grand houses on Chestnut Street, the bustling markets, the theater performances she'd attended with her parents before their fortunes changed. As she spoke, those memories seemed to belong to another person from another life. "You miss it?" Lucas asked when she fell silent. "The city, I mean," Bethany considered the question. "I miss certain things: hot baths, libraries, knowing what tomorrow will bring." She looked out at the wild landscape beyond their shelter. "But I don't miss feeling trapped by expectations and traditions that made little sense to me." "What do you mean?" she sighed, organizing her thoughts. "In Philadelphia, my worth was determined by my father's status and the man I would eventually marry. When father lost everything, suddenly I was invisible to the people who had once sought my company." Her hands twisted in her lap. "That's why I joined the Wagon train. In California, I thought I could start fresh, be valued for myself rather than my connections." "The West has a way of stripping away pretenses," Lucas agreed. "Out here, what matters is whether you can pull your weight, keep your word, and stand by your friends when trouble comes." He added a stick to the fire. "Though I won't pretend it's perfect. People bring their prejudices with them, same as they bring their furniture and tools." As evening approached, the rain finally stopped, though dark clouds still hung low in the sky. Lucas ventured out to gather more firewood before it got too dark. When he returned, his arms full of relatively dry branches, he found Bethany had unpacked their meager food supplies and arranged them neatly on a flat rock. "I thought I'd prepare dinner tonight," she said. It's the least I can do to thank you for your kindness." Lucas looked surprised but pleased. "I'll tend to the horse while you cook, then." The meal was simple beans flavored with the last of their jerky, but sharing it in the warm glow of the fire created a sense of comfort neither had expected. As they finished eating, Bethany noticed Lucas wincing slightly as he rolled his shoulder. "Are you injured?" she asked with concern. "Old wound," he explained. "Acts up sometimes when the weather turns. Took a bullet during a cattle raid 3 years back. Healed well enough, but I can feel a storm coming before the clouds show." Without thinking, Bethany moved closer. "My father suffered from similar pains. May I?" she asked, her hands hovering near his shoulder. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. Bethany gently placed her hands on his shoulder, feeling for the knots of tension beneath his shirt. Her fingers worked methodically, applying pressure where she felt resistance. "My father said I had healing hands," she commented as she worked. When his joints ached, this would sometimes ease his discomfort. Lucas remained silent, but she could feel him gradually relaxing under her touch. After several minutes, he sighed. "That does feel better, thank you." Their eyes met as she withdrew her hands, and something shifted in the air between them. Bethany became acutely aware of their isolation, the intimacy of their shared space. Lucas cleared his throat and moved to add more wood to the fire. "We should rest," he said. "If the weather holds, we'll reach Fairplay tomorrow evening." Bethany nodded, suddenly shy. She retreated to her side of the fire, wrapping herself in the blanket he'd provided. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself watching Lucas's profile against the firelight, wondering what awaited them in Fairplay and what would happen when their journey together ended. Morning brought clear skies and a landscape transformed by the rain. Wildflowers had appeared overnight, dotting the prairie with splashes of yellow and purple. They set out early, both aware that this might be their last full day of traveling together. "Tell me about Fairplay," Bethany requested as they rode. "What kind of town is it?" "It started as a mining camp when they found gold in the South Platte River back in '59, Lucas explained. "Grew pretty quick after that. It's still rough around the edges, but it's starting to develop some civilization, got a school, a church, couple of general stores." He guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "Miners come down from the hills to spend their dust, and ranchers bring cattle through on the way to bigger markets. Creates a need for all sorts of services. And you think I might find work there, a woman who can read and write? Who knows figures? Yes, I'd say your chances are good. The school teacher might need help, or one of the merchants. Women are still scarce in these parts, especially educated ones." His assessment gave Bethany hope, though the prospect of arriving in a strange town with no connections and few possessions remained daunting. They rode in companionable silence for several miles, the landscape gradually changing as they approached the foothills. Pine forests replaced the open prairie, and the terrain grew more challenging. By mid-afternoon, they reached a high ridge that afforded them a spectacular view. Below, a valley stretched out, with a river winding through it like a silver ribbon. In the distance, snow-capped mountains pierced the sky. "It's beautiful," Bethany breathed, taking in the panorama. "This is why I stay out here," Lucas replied softly. "No matter how hard life gets, views like this remind me that there's something bigger than our troubles." They paused there for a brief rest, sharing the last of their provisions. As they prepared to continue, Bethany noticed a column of smoke rising from the trees about a mile ahead. "Is that Fairplay?" she asked. Lucas frowned, shading his eyes to study the smoke. "No, town's still a good ways off." "That looks like a campfire." He seemed to consider something before adding, "We should approach carefully. Could be friendly travelers, could be something else." His caution reminded Bethany of the dangers that still existed in this beautiful but untamed country. They mounted again, Lucas guiding the horse on a path that provided cover from whoever might be ahead. As they drew closer, they could hear voices carrying on the wind, men's voices, raised in argument. Lucas signaled for quiet and dismounted, helping Bethany down before tethering the horse to a tree. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'll go see who we're dealing with." "Be careful," she urged, suddenly afraid for him. Lucas moved silently through the underbrush, disappearing from view. Bethany waited anxiously, straining to hear anything beyond the rustling of leaves and distant voices. After what seemed an eternity but was probably less than 10 minutes, Lucas returned, his expression grim. "4 men," he reported quietly. "They've got a prisoner, a young Ute boy, no more than 14. They're arguing about whether to kill him or try to ransom him back to his people." Bethany's hand flew to her mouth. "That's monstrous. We have to help him." "It's risky," Lucas warned. "They're armed and there's 4 of them against 1 of me." "What if we created a distraction, something to divide their attention?" Lucas considered her suggestion. "It might work if we're clever about it." He studied her face. "This isn't your fight, Bethany. If you'd rather continue to fair play, I'd understand." She straightened her shoulders. "I may be new to the West, Mr. Owens, but I know right from wrong. I'm helping whether you approve or not." A slow smile spread across his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." He outlined a simple but potentially effective plan. Bethany would circle wide around the camp and, at Lucas's signal, create a distraction on the opposite side, hopefully drawing some of the men away from the prisoner. Meanwhile, Lucas would approach the camp from cover and free the boy when the opportunity arose. "If anything goes wrong, you run," Lucas instructed firmly. "Get on my horse and ride east. You'll hit a trail within a few miles that leads to fair play." Bethany nodded, though she had no intention of leaving him behind if trouble arose. They separated, with Bethany carefully making her way through the forest as Lucas had shown her, placing each foot deliberately to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. When she reached her position, she could see the camp clearly. 4 rough-looking men seated around a fire, and a little distance away, a Native American boy tied to a tree. The boy's face was bruised, but his eyes remained defiant as he stared at his captors. Bethany waited for Lucas's signal, a bird call that cut through the men's conversation. Taking a deep breath, she picked up a heavy stick and began thrashing through the underbrush, making as much noise as possible while moving away from the camp. "Someone's coming," she heard one of the men shout. "Check it out, Miller. Why me? Send Blake. Both of you go," a third voice commanded. "Could be Utes looking for the boy." Bethany increased her pace, still making noise but being careful not to leave an obvious trail. She could hear 2 sets of footsteps crashing through the forest behind her, but she had a good head start and knowledge of where Lucas was positioned. When she'd led the men a sufficient distance from camp, she doubled back through a dense thicket, making her way toward the position where Lucas should be engaging the remaining captors. As she approached, she heard shouts and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Breaking into a run, she emerged into the clearing to find Lucas grappling with one man while another lay unconscious nearby. The native boy was no longer tied to the tree, but was instead helping Lucas by wielding a heavy branch against his opponent. The sight of the boy fighting alongside Lucas, instead of fleeing, surprised her, but there was no time to dwell on it. The 2 men who had pursued her would return any moment. She looked around frantically for a weapon and spotted a rifle leaning against a log near the fire. Bethany had never fired a gun before, but her father had explained the basic principles. She grabbed the weapon, checking to see if it was loaded as she'd seen Lucas do with his own rifle. Finding it ready to fire, she positioned herself where she could watch for the returning men. They burst into the clearing just as Lucas subdued his opponent with a well-placed punch. The man crumpled to the ground, leaving Lucas free to spin around and face the new threat. But he was unarmed, his own gun having been knocked away during the fight. "Stop right there," Bethany commanded, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Her arms trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. The men froze, eyeing her uncertainly. "You won't shoot that thing, lady," one said, taking a tentative step forward. "Probably don't even know how." Bethany aimed at a tree trunk just to the man's left and pulled the trigger. The explosion was louder than she'd expected, and the recoil nearly knocked her off her feet, but her shot hit its mark, sending bark flying. "The next one won't miss," she warned, trying to ignore the ringing in her ears as she struggled to reload the way she'd seen hunters do back east. Lucas seized the moment to retrieve his own weapon. "I suggest you boys collect your friends and ride out," he said calmly. "Unless you're eager to explain to the territorial marshal why you were planning to murder a child." The men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their options. "The Injun attacked us first," one protested weakly. "We was just defending ourselves." The native boy spat on the ground, then spoke in surprisingly good English. "You came to our hunting grounds, tried to steal our horses. When my father and brothers chased you away, you caught me alone." Lucas kept his rifle trained on the men. "I believe the boy. Now, you've got 1 minute to gather your things and go. If I ever see any of you again, I won't be so generous." The men reluctantly collected their unconscious companions and their meager belongings. Within minutes, they had mounted their horses and disappeared into the forest, casting dark glances back at Lucas, Bethany, and the boy. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded did Lucas lower his weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked Bethany, moving quickly to her side. "No, just shaken," she admitted, her hands still trembling as she set down the rifle. "I've never fired a gun before." Lucas's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. "You were magnificent, but also reckless. They could have shot you." "They could have shot you too," she countered. "I wasn't going to hide in the woods while you fought alone." Their eyes locked for a long moment before the native boy cleared his throat. "My people will remember what you have done," he said formally. "I am called Running Elk." Lucas turned to the boy, switching easily from English to what Bethany assumed was the Ute language. They conversed briefly before Lucas nodded and returned to English. "Running Elk's village is half a day's journey from here," he explained to Bethany. "He says we would be welcomed as honored guests if we escorted him home." Bethany hesitated. "What about fair play? You said we'd reach it by evening." "The town will still be there tomorrow," Lucas replied, "but it might be wise to make sure Running Elk reaches his people safely." "Those men could return with reinforcements." She nodded her understanding. "Then we should go. His family must be worried sick." They retrieved Lucas's horse and set off in a new direction, with Running Elk riding behind Lucas and Bethany walking alongside. The boy explained that his village was located in a hidden valley to the northwest, where the Ute had seasonal hunting camps. As they traveled, Running Elk shared stories of his people, their traditions, their struggles with encroaching settlers, and their determination to maintain their way of life despite growing pressure to move onto reservations. Bethany listened intently, realizing how little she knew about the original inhabitants of this vast country. "My father is a sub-chief," Running Elk explained. "He has tried to keep peace with the white settlers, but it becomes more difficult each season. Some of our young men want to fight, while others believe we must adapt to survive." "What do you believe?" Bethany asked. The boy was quiet for a moment. "I believe we must learn the ways of the white man without forgetting our own. Like the eagle that soars highest when it understands both the air currents and the land below." His wisdom, coming from one so young, impressed Bethany. She glanced at Lucas, who was nodding thoughtfully at Running Elk's words. "You speak our language well," she observed. "I spent 2 winters at the mission school," Running Elk replied. "The priests taught us English and numbers. Some of it was good knowledge, some," he shrugged, "some tried to make us forget who we are." By late afternoon, they reached the entrance to a narrow canyon. Running Elk directed them through it, following a path that would have been invisible to untrained eyes. The canyon opened into a secluded valley where a village of about 20 lodges stood near a clear stream. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played among the dwellings. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Men reached for weapons while women gathered the children close. But Running Elk called out in his language, and the tension visibly eased. A tall, dignified man with gray streaks in his long hair stepped forward, his face transforming from wariness to joy as he recognized his son. What followed was a flurry of activity as Running Elk was reunited with his family, and the story of his capture and rescue was related to the assembled tribe. Bethany found herself and Lucas at the center of attention, with curious eyes examining their clothing, their possessions, and their interactions. The chief, who introduced himself as Standing Bear, insisted they remain as honored guests for the night. "My son lives because of your courage," he said through Running Elk, who translated. "Our lodge is your lodge." A feast was prepared featuring venison, wild roots, and berries. As they ate, tribal elders asked questions about conditions beyond their territory, whether more settlers were coming, if the army had new outposts, how the hunting was in regions they hadn't visited recently. Lucas answered thoughtfully, neither sugar-coating difficult realities nor offering apocalyptic predictions. He spoke of increased settlement, but also mentioned areas where game remained plentiful and settlers were few. "You know our people well," Standing Bear observed. "Few white men speak our tongue or understand our ways. I try to listen more than I talk," Lucas replied simply, "and I've had good teachers from many tribes." As night fell, the celebration continued with singing and dancing around a central fire. Bethany watched, entranced by the rhythmic movements and haunting melodies that seemed to connect the performers to the earth beneath their feet and the stars above. "It's beautiful," she whispered to Lucas, who sat beside her on a buffalo robe that had been provided for their comfort. "Yes," he agreed, though she noticed his eyes were on her face rather than the dancers. When she met his gaze, he didn't look away. "You continue to surprise me, Bethany Collins." "How so?" "Most city women I've encountered would be terrified to be in an Indian camp. Yet here you sit, watching their dances with genuine appreciation rather than fear or disgust." She considered his observation. "Perhaps I've changed more in these few days than I realized, or perhaps I was never as much a city woman as circumstances forced me to be." Their conversation was interrupted when Running Elk approached with his mother, a handsome woman with kind eyes who carried a folded bundle. "My mother wishes to thank you," the boy said. "She has brought a gift." The woman presented the bundle to Bethany with a few soft words that Running Elk translated. "For the brave woman who helped save her son, a dress in our style, made by her own hands for her daughter who now walks with the ancestors." Bethany accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, touched by the woman's generosity. The garment was beautiful, a dress of soft deerskin adorned with intricate beadwork and dyed porcupine quills in geometric patterns. "Please tell her I'm honored," Bethany said, carefully unfolding the dress to admire the craftsmanship. "I will treasure it always." Running Elk's mother smiled at Bethany's obvious appreciation, then spoke again. Her son translated. "She says you have the spirit of the mountain lion, gentle in appearance but fierce when protecting those in danger. She would be proud to call you sister." That night, Bethany and Lucas were given a small lodge for privacy. As they settled onto the comfortable sleeping pallets provided by their hosts, Bethany found herself reluctant for their journey to end. "Will we still reach Fairplay tomorrow?" she asked into the darkness. "By midday if we leave at dawn," Lucas confirmed. "It's not far from here as the crow flies, though the trail is steep in places." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Bethany gathered her courage. "What will you do after you've delivered me safely to town?" She heard him shift on his pallet. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "I was hired to scout for a cattle drive heading to Denver in a week's time. Thought I'd see you settled in Fairplay, then make my way there." "I see," she said, trying to mask her disappointment. Of course he had his own life, his own plans. She'd known their paths would diverge eventually. Unless. He began, then fell silent. "Unless what?" she prompted. Lucas cleared his throat. "Unless you might want company for a bit longer. Fairplay's a decent town, but it can be hard for a newcomer to find their footing. I could delay meeting the drive by a few days, help you get established." Bethany smiled into the darkness, warmth spreading through her chest. I'd like that very much. Morning came with the songs of unfamiliar birds and the soft sounds of the village awakening. Bethany rose early and, after a moment's consideration, changed into the dress given to her by Running Elk's mother. The deerskin was softer than any fabric she'd worn before, and the garment fit surprisingly well. When she emerged from the lodge, she found Lucas speaking with Standing Bear near the central fire pit. Both men turned at her approach, and she saw appreciation flash in Lucas's eyes before he masked it with a friendly smile. "The dress suits you," he said simply. Standing Bear nodded his agreement and spoke in his language. Running Elk, appearing at his father's side, translated. "My father says you honor our people by wearing our clothing. He asks if the woman with the heart of a mountain lion will accept another gift before departing." Curious, Bethany nodded. Standing Bear presented her with a small leather pouch suspended on a beaded cord. When she opened it, she found a polished stone of deep green carved with a simple symbol. "Jade," Running Elk explained. "From far mountains to the west, the symbol means protection. It is very old, passed through my father's family for many generations." "I couldn't possibly accept something so valuable," Bethany protested. The chief spoke again, his expression serious. Running Elk translated. "My father says that saving his son's life created a bond between our families that cannot be broken. The stone is a reminder that you will always have friends among the Ute people." Overwhelmed by the gesture, Bethany bowed her head in acceptance. "Please tell your father I will treasure this gift and the friendship it represents." After sharing a morning meal with the tribe, Bethany and Lucas prepared to depart. Standing Bear provided them with fresh supplies for their journey and assigned 2 young warriors to escort them partway to Fairplay, ensuring they wouldn't encounter the men who had captured Running Elk. The boy himself came to bid them farewell. "I will tell stories of the brave woman and her cowboy for many winters," he promised with a grin that made him look his age. "Her cowboy?" Lucas repeated, raising an eyebrow. Running Elk shrugged. "Is that not what you are? You watch her when she doesn't see, like my father watches my mother." Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Lucas merely laughed. "You're observant, Running Elk. That will serve you well when you become a leader of your people." They departed amid waves and calls of farewell, their Ute escorts leading them along a hidden trail that wound through the mountains. By mid-morning, they had reached a ridge overlooking a valley where a small town nestled along a river. "Fairplay," Lucas announced, pointing toward the collection of wooden buildings. Named because the miners who founded it wanted fair play for all, no claim jumping or cheating allowed. Bethany studied the town with mixed emotions. It represented safety and the possibility of rebuilding her life, but it also meant the end of her journey with Lucas. Despite knowing him for only a few days, she'd come to rely on his quiet strength and straightforward manner. Their Ute escorts left them at the ridge, returning to their village with final waves of farewell. Lucas and Bethany continued downward, following a trail that grew more defined as they approached civilization. As they neared the town, Bethany could make out individual buildings, a church with a small steeple, several saloons, a hotel, general stores, and scattered houses. People moved along the main street, going about their business with the purposeful stride of those building something from nothing. "It's larger than I expected," she commented. "It's grown considerably in the last year," Lucas replied. "The gold's holding out in the nearby creeks, and where there's gold, there's commerce." He pointed to a 2-story building with a painted sign. "That's the Fairplay Hotel. We can get you a room there while you decide on your next steps." They rode down the main street, attracting curious glances from passers-by. Bethany was acutely aware that she made an unusual sight in her Ute dress, riding behind a trail-worn cowboy. But the stares didn't bother her as they might have just days ago. At the hotel, Lucas helped her dismount, then tied his horse to the hitching post. "Let me secure you a room," he offered. "Then perhaps we can find something to eat that isn't jerky or beans." The hotel lobby was simply furnished but clean, with a polished wooden counter and a carpet that had seen better days. A middle-aged woman with graying hair pinned into a severe bun looked up from her ledger as they entered. "Mr. Owens," she greeted Lucas with a nod. "Been a while since you passed through, Mrs. Harker," he replied pleasantly. "You're looking well. We'd like a room, please." The woman's eyes darted between them, taking in Bethany's unusual attire and their trail-worn appearance. Her expression remained neutral, but Bethany sensed disapproval. "For the lady," Lucas clarified quickly. "I'll find accommodation elsewhere." Mrs. Harker's posture relaxed slightly. "I see, that'll be 50 cents a night, meals extra." As Lucas reached for his money pouch, Bethany touched his arm. "I can't let you pay for me," she said quietly. "You've done too much already." "Consider it a loan," he suggested. "You can repay me when you're settled." Reluctantly, she nodded. After completing the transaction, Mrs. Harker handed Bethany a key. "Room 6, top of the stairs, end of the hall, washrooms at the other end." "Dinner's served from 6 to 8. "Thank you," Bethany replied. "I wonder if you might know of any employment opportunities in town. I'm educated, I can read, write, keep accounts, and I've had some experience teaching children." Mrs. Harker's expression softened slightly. "As it happens, Mrs. Peterson at the school has been looking for an assistant. Her student numbers have grown with all the new families arriving. You might speak with her. The schoolhouse is just past the church." "Thank you," Bethany said gratefully. "I'll do that tomorrow." Once settled in her room, a small but clean space with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers, Bethany finally had a moment to absorb how drastically her circumstances had changed in just a few days. From abandoned and desperate on the prairie, to safely housed in a growing town, with promising employment prospects, all because a cowboy had decided she was worth riding back for. She washed away the trail dust as best she could with the pitcher of water provided, then changed back into her travel-worn dress, saving the beautiful ute garment for a special occasion. When she met Lucas downstairs, he had also cleaned up, his hair still damp from what must have been a quick bath. "There's a decent cafe down the street," he suggested. "Nothing fancy, but the food is honest and plentiful." The meal that followed was the most civilized they'd shared, seated at a proper table with plates, utensils, and hot food brought by a waitress who called everyone honey, regardless of age or gender. Bethany savored each bite of the roast chicken and vegetables, realizing how much she'd missed simple comforts during their journey. "Mrs. Harker mentioned the school needs an assistant teacher," she told Lucas between bites. "I plan to inquire tomorrow." "That sounds promising," he agreed. "The town's growing fast enough that they need educated folks. Miners and cowboys can build a settlement, but it takes teachers and the like to build a community." As they ate, Lucas pointed out various town residents who passed the cafe's windows, providing brief histories and assessments of their characters. It struck Bethany that despite his nomadic lifestyle, he paid close attention to people and remembered details others might overlook. "How is it you know so many people here if you just pass through occasionally?" she asked. Lucas shrugged. "I listen. People like to talk, especially in places like this where news travels slow. Spend an evening in a saloon or a general store and you'll learn most of what's happening in a 100-mile radius." After dinner, they walked slowly back toward the hotel. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple that took Bethany's breath away. Despite the growing darkness, the town remained active. Saloon doors swung open and closed, releasing bursts of piano music and raucous laughter, while riders trotted down the main street on various errands. "It's so alive," Bethany observed. "Different from Philadelphia, certainly, but with its own energy," Lucas nodded. "Towns like this either thrive or die within a few years. Fairplay's putting down roots, becoming something lasting." He glanced at her. "A good place to start over, I think." At the hotel entrance, they paused, suddenly awkward with each other. "Where will you stay tonight?" Bethany asked. "There's a boarding house for trail hands at the edge of town," Lucas replied. "Not as fancy as this place, but the beds are clean and the company's interesting." "Will I see you tomorrow?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Lucas studied her face in the fading light. "If you'd like, I could accompany you to the school, make introductions." "I'd appreciate that," she said, relieved that their parting was postponed at least another day. He tipped his hat. "Until tomorrow, then. Sleep well, Bethany. Good night, Lucas." She watched him walk away, a strange emptiness forming in her chest as his figure receded into the gathering darkness. Shaking off the feeling, she turned and entered the hotel, nodding politely to Mrs. Harker before climbing the stairs to her room. That night, despite the comfort of a real bed after days of sleeping on the ground, Bethany found it difficult to fall asleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead: the school, the possibility of building a new life in this frontier town, and most persistently, Lucas Owens and his imminent departure. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. 4 days on the trail didn't constitute a foundation for anything lasting. Yet she couldn't deny that something had formed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Morning brought clarity, or at least determination. Whatever her feelings, she needed to establish herself in fair play, find work, and create a stable life. Anything else was a luxury she couldn't afford to dwell on. After breakfast in the hotel dining room, Bethany waited in the lobby for Lucas. When he arrived, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt, she felt a flutter in her stomach that she firmly suppressed. "Ready to meet Mrs. Peterson?" he asked after greeting her. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with more confidence than she felt. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with large windows and a small bell tower. When they entered, they found a middle-aged woman with spectacles perched on her nose, writing arithmetic problems on a blackboard. The room was empty of students as it was Saturday. "Mrs. Peterson." Lucas called. The woman turned, adjusting her spectacles. "Yes. Oh, Mr. Owens, this is unexpected. I've brought someone I think you should meet," he said, gesturing to Bethany. "This is Miss Collins. She arrived in town yesterday and is seeking employment. I understand you might need assistance with your growing class." Mrs. Peterson's eyes brightened as she studied Bethany. "Indeed I do. The mining camp north of town just sent 7 more children, and I'm expecting at least 10 more when the Harmon family arrives with their relatives next month." She approached Bethany with an extended hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Collins. What experience do you have with children?" Bethany shook her hand. "I tutored in Philadelphia for several years, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and basic sciences to children aged 5 through 16. I've also assisted in a Sunday school and worked briefly as a governess." Mrs. Peterson's expression grew increasingly pleased as Bethany spoke. "Formal education. I completed the full curriculum at Miss Porter's Academy for Young Ladies, with additional studies in literature and mathematics under private tutors." "Well," Mrs. Peterson said, removing her spectacles, "it seems Mr. Owens has brought me exactly what I've been praying for. When can you start?" Bethany blinked, surprised by the immediate offer. "As soon as you need me." "Monday morning, then. 8 o'clock sharp. The position pays $30 a month with room and board included. I have a small apartment attached to the back of the schoolhouse that previous assistants have used." The offer exceeded Bethany's expectations. Not only employment but housing as well, solving 2 problems at once. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I accept gratefully." They discussed details for several minutes: the curriculum, student ages, and expectations for behavior and academic progress. When they finished, Mrs. Peterson handed Bethany a key to the apartment. "Feel free to move your things in today. The space is basic but comfortable." Outside, Bethany could barely contain her excitement. "Can you believe it? Employment and housing just like that?" Lucas smiled at her enthusiasm. "Told you your skills would be valued here." His expression grew more serious. "I'm glad you'll be settled before I have to leave." The reminder of his departure dampened her joy. When do you need to be in Denver? I should head out tomorrow morning if I want to reach the meeting point on time. He hesitated. Would you like to see your new home? I could help you move your things from the hotel. I'd appreciate that, she said, trying to ignore the tightness in her throat. The apartment behind the schoolhouse was indeed small, just a bedroom, tiny sitting area, and a nook with a stove and wash basin, but it was clean and had its own entrance. Previous occupants had left simple furnishings: a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf, and a chest of drawers. It's perfect, Bethany declared, running her hand along the rough-hewn table. My own space earned through my own efforts. Lucas watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. You'll make it home in no time. They returned to the hotel to collect her few possessions and settle her account. Mrs. Harker seemed genuinely pleased to learn of Bethany's employment. Mrs. Peterson is a fine woman, she assured them. Strict but fair, the town respects her greatly. By mid-afternoon, Bethany was settled in her new quarters. Lucas had been helpful but quiet during the move, and now that they had nothing practical to occupy them, an awkward silence fell between them. Would you care to walk around town? He finally suggested. I could show you where to find supplies, introduce you to a few reliable merchants. I'd like that, she agreed quickly. They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring Fairplay. Lucas introduced her to the storekeeper, the doctor, and the blacksmith, all of whom welcomed her warmly once they understood she was the school's new assistant teacher. They stopped at the general store, where Lucas insisted on purchasing basic supplies for her apartment: coffee, sugar, flour, and other essentials. Consider it a housewarming gift, he said when she protested. As evening approached, Lucas suggested dinner at the town's best restaurant, a relatively new establishment called the Silver Fork. A proper farewell, he explained. Something better than trail food or cafe fare. The restaurant was surprisingly elegant for a frontier town, with tablecloths, oil lamps, and a menu that included dishes Bethany hadn't tasted since leaving Philadelphia. They were seated near a window overlooking the main street, where the setting sun cast long shadows between the buildings. To new beginnings, Lucas said, raising his glass in a toast. And to kind strangers who become friends, Bethany added, touching her glass to his. Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics they hadn't explored during their journey: favorite books, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Bethany was struck by how comfortable she felt with him, how naturally they seemed to understand each other despite their different backgrounds. What will you do after this cattle drive? She asked as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. Lucas considered the question. There's always work for a good scout or trail hand, but... He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue, but, she prompted, I've been thinking lately that it might be time to put down roots somewhere. His eyes met hers. The trail life suits a young man with nothing to lose. I'm starting to wonder if there might be more to life than just moving on when things get complicated. Bethany's heart quickened. What sort of roots are you considering? I've saved some money over the years, enough to buy a small ranch maybe. There's good land south of here, not too far from town but far enough to have space. He traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger. A man could build something there, something lasting. The possibility hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Bethany took a deep breath. It sounds like you've given this considerable thought. More so in the past few days than ever before, he admitted quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Bethany felt as if they were standing on the edge of a cliff together, both afraid to leap but unwilling to step back. The moment was broken when the restaurant owner approached their table. Forgive the interruption, folks, but we're closing up soon. They stepped out into the cool night air, both a little dazed by the conversation and its implications. Lucas walked Bethany back to her apartment in companionable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the narrow streets. At her door, they paused. What time will you leave tomorrow? She asked. First light, he replied. Best to make good distance before the day gets hot. Bethany nodded, fighting unexpected tears. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You already have, Lucas said softly. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. You showed courage when most would have surrendered to fear. That's thanks enough. Will you come back this way? The question escaped before she could stop it. Lucas studied her face in the moonlight. Would you want me to? Yes, she whispered, the single word carrying more emotion than she'd intended. He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Then I will. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both question and promise. Bethany responded with a certainty that surprised her, her hands resting lightly on his chest as she returned the kiss. When they separated, both were breathing a little faster. I should go, Lucas said reluctantly. Early start tomorrow. I understand. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the jade talisman Standing Bear had given her. Breaking the cord, she divided it in two, retying one end to secure the stone. The other half she offered to Lucas. Take this, for protection on the trail. He accepted the gift with obvious emotion. I'll be back before the first snow, he promised. That's about 2 months from now. I'll be here, she replied simply. With a final, gentle kiss, he departed, his silhouette gradually fading into the darkness. Bethany watched until he was completely out of sight before entering her apartment and closing the door. Alone, she allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. Had she been foolish, developing feelings for a man she barely knew? Was she setting herself up for disappointment if he never returned? But as she prepared for bed, she found herself smiling rather than worrying. Something told her that Lucas Owens was a man of his word. And 2 months wasn't so very long to wait. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Bethany threw herself into her work at the school, quickly earning the respect of both Mrs. Peterson and the students. Her Eastern education brought new perspectives to the classroom, while her genuine interest in the children's lives and experiences endeared her to families throughout the community. She furnished her small apartment with items purchased from incoming settlers who decided Fairplay wasn't for them after all, creating a cozy space that reflected her personality. On weekends, she explored the surrounding countryside, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of new friends, including Sarah Miller, the young wife of the general store owner. You've settled in remarkably well, Mrs. Peterson commented one afternoon as they reviewed lesson plans. It's as if you've always been part of Fairplay. It feels that way to me too, Bethany admitted. I thought I'd miss city life more than I do. And does your contentment have anything to do with that handsome cowboy who brought you to town? Mrs. Peterson asked with a knowing smile. The one you watch for whenever a rider approaches from the east, Bethany blushed. Is it that obvious? Only to anyone with eyes, the older woman teased gently. Lucas Owens is a good man. One of the few in these parts who treats everyone with equal respect, regardless of their station or background. You know him well. Well enough. He saved my nephew from drowning in the river 2 springs ago, then refused any reward. Just said anyone would have done the same, though we both knew that wasn't true. Mrs. Peterson adjusted her spectacles. Men like that are rare in any place, but especially on the frontier where survival often trumps compassion. As October turned to November, Bethany found herself watching the mountain passes more frequently. Lucas had promised to return before the first snow, and the mornings now carried a chill that suggested winter wasn't far off. One Saturday, while helping Sarah Miller inventory new stock at the general store, Bethany overheard 2 miners discussing the weather. Storm coming, one said confidently. My knee's been aching something fierce since yesterday. Better than that fancy barometer Jeffries bought, his companion agreed. How long we got, you reckon? 3 days, maybe 4. Anyone not in town by then's likely to get caught in the first big snow. Bethany tried to hide her concern, but Sarah noticed, worried about your cowboy. She asked quietly when the miners had moved on. He said he'd be back before snow, Bethany confirmed, and I believe him, but the passes can be treacherous even in good weather. Sarah squeezed her hand. Lucas knows these mountains better than most. If he said he'd return, he will. 3 days later, Bethany was teaching the younger children their letters when a commotion in the street drew their attention. One of the older boys rushed to the window. "Cattle Drive," he announced excitedly. "Looks like they're bringing them right through town, Mrs." Peterson sighed but nodded permission for the children to look. They crowded the windows, watching as cowboys guided a modest herd of cattle along the main street, their shouts and whistles carrying clearly through the glass. Bethany joined them, her eyes scanning the riders. Her heart leaped when she spotted a familiar figure near the rear of the procession, his hat pulled low against the wind that had picked up throughout the morning. "Is that your friend, Miss Collins?" asked a small girl beside her. "Yes, Emily, I believe it is," she replied, trying to maintain a teacher's composure while her pulse raced. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should continue our lesson. The cattle will pass through soon enough." The children reluctantly returned to their desks, though several continued to cast longing glances toward the windows. Bethany forced herself to focus on the lesson, even as her mind filled with questions. Would Lucas come find her after the cattle were settled? Had his feelings changed during their separation? When the school day finally ended, Bethany released the children and began cleaning the classroom with deliberate care, trying not to appear as anxious as she felt. "Go," Mrs. Peterson said suddenly. "The blackboard can wait until morning." Bethany looked up, startled. You've been watching the clock for the past hour," the older woman said with a kind smile. "Go find him." With a grateful nod, Bethany collected her shawl and hurried from the schoolhouse. The air had grown colder, and dark clouds loomed over the mountains to the west. She made her way toward the livery stable, where she'd heard the cowboys would be staying until the cattle could be loaded onto train cars the following day. As she approached, she saw Lucas emerging from the stable, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt despite the trail dust that still clung to his boots. He stopped when he saw her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You came back," she said simply when she reached him. "I promised I would." His eyes searched her face. "How have you been, Bethany?" "Well, very well. The teaching position is everything I could have hoped for." She hesitated, suddenly shy. "And you, how was your journey?" "Long," he admitted. "Made longer by thoughts of what I left behind in Fairplay." A group of cowboys exited the stable, their loud conversation interrupting the moment. Lucas glanced at them, then back to Bethany. "Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, she nodded. He offered his arm and she took it, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her after weeks of absence. He guided her through town to the outskirts where a wagon stood waiting, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Your wagon?" she asked, confused. "Borrowed from a friend," he explained. "I thought we might ride out a ways if you're willing. It won't take long." "The weather's turning," she observed, looking at the darkening sky. "We'll be back before the storm hits," he promised. "It's important." His serious expression convinced her. "All right." He helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a gentle click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion, guiding them south along a well-maintained road. They rode in comfortable silence for nearly half an hour, the landscape changing from town outskirts to open country dotted with stands of pine. Finally, Lucas guided the wagon onto a smaller trail that led to a ridge overlooking a picturesque valley. A clear stream wound through it, and sheltering bluffs provided natural protection from the prevailing winds. Lucas stopped the wagon and helped Bethany down. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward the valley. "It's beautiful," she replied honestly. "Peaceful." "I bought it," he said quietly. 160 acres, including water rights to the stream." Bethany turned to him in surprise. "You purchased land," he nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "I wasn't sure I'd find anything suitable so close to town, but this came available last month." previous owner decided mining was more to his liking than ranching. "It's wonderful, Lucas, but I don't understand why you wanted to show me today with a storm coming and after such a long drive." He took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket to withdraw something that glinted in his palm, the half of the jade talisman she had given him, now set in a simple silver band. "Because I couldn't wait another day to ask if you might consider sharing it with me." His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed vulnerability. "I know it's fast. We've known each other only a short time, but I've thought of little else besides you since I rode away 2 months ago." Bethany's heart hammered in her chest as he continued. "I'm not a wealthy man, and this land will require years of hard work to become the ranch I envision. But if you were beside me—" He paused, visibly gathering courage. "Bethany Collins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to still around them as his words hung in the cool air. Bethany looked from the ring to his face, searching for any doubt in her own heart and finding none. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Lucas, I would be proud to be your wife." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the green stone catching the last rays of sun breaking through the clouds. "I hoped you'd say that," he admitted, drawing her into his arms. "I've never been so nervous in all my days." She laughed against his chest. The man who faced down armed kidnappers without flinching, nervous about a question. "The most important question of my life," he corrected, tilting her face up to his. "And the most important answer." Their kiss was deeper than their first, filled with the promise of a shared future. When they finally broke apart, the first snowflakes had begun to fall, gentle harbingers of the storm to come. "We should head back," Lucas said reluctantly. "I promised to return you before the weather turned." As they drove back toward town, the snow fell more heavily, dusting the landscape with white. Bethany leaned against Lucas's shoulder, her hand resting on his arm, the jade ring a comfortable weight on her finger. "When would you want to marry?" he asked, guiding the horses carefully on the increasingly slippery road. "I don't need a grand ceremony," she replied. "Perhaps before Christmas, that would give us time to prepare the ranch house for winter." "The ranch house needs considerable work," he warned. "It's little more than a cabin now, nothing like what you were accustomed to in Philadelphia." "I don't need luxury, Lucas. These past months have taught me the difference between necessities and comforts." She squeezed his arm gently. "A solid roof, warm hearth, and good company are all I require." His smile was tender. "Those I can provide, with a promise of more as we build our life together." By the time they reached town, the snow was falling steadily. Lucas returned Bethany to her apartment with a promise to call on her the next day after concluding his business with the cattle buyer. At her door, he kissed her once more, lingering as if reluctant to leave despite the weather. "Until tomorrow," he said finally. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching him disappear into the swirling snow. Inside, Bethany moved to her small window, watching the white flakes transform Fairplay into a winter wonderland. Just weeks ago, she had been abandoned on the prairie, her future uncertain. Now she had meaningful work, a community that valued her, and the love of a good man who had ridden back when everyone else had gone forward. As she prepared for bed, her gaze fell on her traveling bag, the same one she had clutched so desperately when the wagon train left her behind. From its depths, she withdrew her father's pocket watch, the one possession of value she'd kept with her rather than storing in the lost trunk. "You would have liked him, father," she whispered, running her thumb over the tarnished case. "He's a man of his word, just as you were." The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. News of their engagement spread quickly through Fairplay, met with general approval and good wishes. Mrs. Peterson insisted Bethany continue teaching until the wedding, arguing that the children needed consistency, though she graciously reduced Bethany's hours to allow time for wedding preparations. Lucas divided his time between town and the ranch, making essential repairs to the cabin before winter fully set in. Bethany joined him whenever possible, helping to clean, plan, and transform the simple structure into a home. Despite its modest size, just 2 rooms with a loft above the cabin had good bones and a sturdy stone fireplace that kept it surprisingly warm. They were married 2 days before Christmas in Fairplay's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Bethany wore the Ute dress gifted by Running Elk's mother, causing a stir of surprised appreciation among the guests. Lucas, in a new shirt and his least-worn trousers, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss held all the promise of their future together, causing several of the older ladies to fan themselves despite the December chill. A community celebration followed at the town hall, with food contributed by many families and music provided by local miners who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and harmonica. As Bethany and Lucas moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes, she marveled at how quickly she had become part of this community. "Mrs. Owens," Lucas murmured as they shared a moment alone near the punch bowl, "how does it feel to have a new name?" "Wonderful," she replied honestly, "though I'm still getting used to it." "You have a lifetime to practice," he reminded her with a smile that made her heart skip. That night they traveled to their ranch despite offers to stay in town until morning. Lucas had been adamant that they spend their first night as husband and wife in their own home. The journey was cold but beautiful, with moonlight reflecting off snow-covered fields and stars brilliant in the clear sky. At the cabin, Lucas surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a romantic gesture she hadn't expected from her practical cowboy. Inside, she found the space transformed: a colorful quilt on the new bed, curtains at the windows, and a small Christmas tree in the corner, adorned with simple ornaments and candles. "The ladies of the church helped," Lucas explained, watching her reaction. "Mrs. Miller was particularly insistent that our home should be properly welcoming for a bride." Bethany turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. "It's perfect." Their life together began that night, tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries about each other that could only come with complete intimacy. In Lucas's arms, Bethany found a belonging she hadn't known was possible, a connection that transcended physical pleasure to touch something deeper in her soul. The winter passed in a pattern of work and togetherness. Lucas continued improvements on the cabin and outbuildings when weather permitted, while Bethany divided her time between teaching and creating a comfortable home. On Sundays, they attended church in town, often staying for dinner with new friends before returning to their quiet valley. By spring, the ranch was beginning to take shape. Lucas purchased a small herd of cattle with his savings, focusing on quality breeding stock rather than quantity. Bethany started a kitchen garden, experimenting with vegetables suited to the mountain climate. They worked hard from sunrise to sunset most days, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied with their progress. Their first anniversary approached as summer turned the valley lush and green. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Bethany rested her head on Lucas's shoulder with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his arm tightening around her. "That I'm grateful the wagon train left me behind," she admitted. "If they hadn't, I might never have known this life, never have known you," he chuckled softly. "I've thought the same. That moment when I realized you weren't with the wagons anymore, something told me to turn back." "Best decision I ever made." Bethany shifted to look up at him. "I have something to tell you," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Oh," his eyebrows rose in question. She took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "By spring, there will be 3 of us on this ranch." Lucas's eyes widened, then filled with wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" "Dr. Morris confirmed it yesterday when I was in town for supplies," she nodded. "He says I'm about 3 months along. We should expect our child in early March." Lucas whooped with joy, lifting her carefully from the porch swing to spin her in a gentle circle. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." As he set her down, he cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Bethany Owens. A home, a purpose, and now a family. And you gave me a second chance when the world had turned its back," she replied, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. "You rode back for me when no one else would." Their kiss was a reaffirmation of the love that had grown between them over the past year, a love born in unlikely circumstances, but nurtured with care, respect, and shared dreams. The following spring brought not just wildflowers to the valley, but also their son, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Samuel, after Bethany's father, and added William as a middle name to honor Lucas's brother who had fallen in the war. As Bethany nursed their infant son in the rocking chair Lucas had crafted during the long winter evenings, she often found herself reflecting on the strange turns of fate that had led her here. The lost trunk that had once seemed such a disaster now appeared as the pivot point that had changed her life's direction for the better. By their 5th anniversary, the Owens Ranch had become known throughout the territory for its quality stock and hospitality. The cabin had expanded to include 2 additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Their family had grown as well, with the addition of a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her father's quiet determination and her mother's love of books. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when Lucas had proposed, they sat together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard with the puppy Samuel had rescued from a creek during the spring floods. "Do you ever wonder what happened to that wagon train?" Lucas asked suddenly. "The one that left you behind," Bethany considered the question. "Sometimes. I heard a few made it to California, but others turned back when they encountered early snow in the mountains." She reached for his hand. "I hope they found what they were looking for, whatever it was, and have you?" He asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Found what you were looking for," she smiled, leaning against his shoulder as their children's laughter filled the air. "I found something better, something I didn't even know to look for. I found home." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Bethany silently blessed the moment of abandonment that had seemed so devastating at the time. For it had led to a cowboy riding back for her, saying 5 simple words that changed everything. "You're with me now." And she was heart, soul, and future entwined with his in a love story that had begun on a dusty trail and continued to unfold in ways neither could have imagined when their journey began.